Hello, everyone. Bonjour et bienvenue. My name is Becky Young, and I'm managing partner at Grossman Young and Hammond, which is an immigration and international protection law firm in the Washington, D.C. area. We're very pleased to be with you today. I'm going to start with some introductions. The topic of this webinar is thinking of moving your business to France. And we have with us today three experts in various aspects of French law who are going to talk us through the hypothetical of a US citizen with a business, a wine import business or export business, import export business, who would like to move that business to France. In our law practice, we've been getting a lot of inquiries recently from individuals who are interested in this very topic, which is why we decided to host this webinar today. I wanted to let you know that we will not be taking live questions during the webinar, but if you have questions and you'd like to post them in the chat, we will do our best to respond to you after the webinar, either by a direct message or depending on if the same question belongs to multiple people, we might do a blog or a future webinar. So please do feel free to share your questions. Let me introduce my fellow panelists. I have Arthur Leclerc, who is, and these three attorneys are all French correspondent attorneys, so they're all affiliated with our law firm, and they're all based in Toulouse, France. Arthur focuses on French immigration law. And next we have Nadia Abada. She focuses on international tax law. And finally, Aurore Le Roi de la Chouinière, who practices commercial law and business and civil law. So each of them is going to be talking about this hypothetical in their respective areas of expertise. So with that, let's get started with Arthur. And again, to present the hypothetical, let's say that someone came to me, they're a US citizen, they have a wine business, and they're interested in moving themselves and their business to France. So Arthur, if I brought that client to you, what things would you consider and what type of advice would you give to that person about potentially moving to France from an immigration perspective?
Well, there is two things actually. There is the immigration way and there is a nationality way. Today I'll be focusing mostly on the nationality question. Most of the time, people, when they think about acquiring the French nationality, they think of one thing, and it's naturalization. Sorry, because it appears to be the most logical way. People are feeling French and want to be recognized as such. However, in most of the case, it is a thing that we try to avoid because naturalization is not a right. You can ask to obtain French nationality this way, but you're never absolutely sure to get it. And so when we can find another way, it's always for the best to search for such a one, for such a way. So even in the US, people are American citizens simply by being born in the country. It is not the case in France. You are not French simply by being born in France, and you have to tick some other boxes to be recognized as a French citizen. For instance, if you live for 18 years in France and that you are still living here at the age of 8 or at the date of your birthday, of your 18th birthday, you are French without any procedure to introduce. But this is the third point I'm talking about. There is some other way also. For instance, if you are born in France but you do not have any other way to acquire another nationality, you are being recognized as a French citizen as well. And there is a few other ones. I will not be talking about each of them, but keep in mind that just being born in France is not sufficient to be French. So you have to be careful about this. The other way, and it's interesting one, is by descent, being born from a French person. So there is a few things to keep in mind, and is that when you are asking to be recognized as a French citizen, you have to prove yourself that you are French. And it can be pretty difficult sometimes. So if one of your parents is French, you are French as well, without any condition of living or being born in France. It is not necessary. However, as it's sometimes difficult to make your nationality being recognized by being your parents' nationality to be recognized, etc. There is another way that is interesting, and is the first box that in the second point. If you are born in France from someone who is himself born in France without being necessarily French himself, you are French, and it's a very important thing to keep in mind, because in a lot of cases it can be a very good way to establish that you are French by this way, and it can be much more easy to prove that you are French this way than be proving it because one of your parents is French. But it's always something that we have to keep in mind. And by descent, as it's written here, you do not have to live or to speak French or anything. It is not a discretionary way. The administration does not have a really important way of appreciating your integration or assimilation to French society. You just are French by law and not by appreciation of the French administration. Finally, there is one point that you will always have to keep in mind, and it's the importance of the civil status documents and of the apostille or legalization procedure. You have to prove that you are French, and you also will have to prove that to establish that you have a civil status that is reliable. And this can be pretty difficult because in some countries the civil status documents are not very safe in the point of view at least of French administration. So we have to be very careful about the documents that we have to constitute the case, because a document that is established in another country, France, has to be apostilled or legalized, depending on the country. Yeah, there is some specific agreements that we have to check all the time to prove that they are being made in the way, the usual way, and that the person who made them is able to. Not being careful about this will always lead to just a denial of the demand. So we have to be very, very careful about this, and this is one of the parts that we have to be careful about. Most of the times, the cases we have to handle are not difficult because it's hard to know if the person is French or not, but mostly because we have to be very careful about the civil status documents and the establishment of French nationality. So if you are a wine maker and you want to come in France by proving that you are French of French nationality, keep in mind that your parents' nationality is very important. Keep in mind that where they are born and where you are born is important as well. And keep in mind that not everyone is George Clooney and can have his French nationality being granted by naturalization an easy way. Thank you.
Thank you, Arthur. I want to underscore your last point about apostilles and civil documents. So, our law firm we have an outbound practice, so we help people to immigrate to many countries in the world, and almost all of the countries have this apostille requirements. It was very interesting to me. A lot of times when we're working on US immigration cases, clients will say, do I need to get a new birth certificate? You know, my birth certificate was issued 50 years ago when I was born. And in the US, typically you don't. Your birth certificate is your birth certificate. It doesn't expire. But for purposes of getting apostilles or these outbound processes, you often do need a new document. It often has to have been issued within 6 months of the application. So you have to go back to the state where you were born to get a new birth certificate. You have to go back to the state where you were married to get a new marriage certificate. And then after you get those certified documents, then you have to have them apostilled by the US State Department, which is another process altogether. And so that's a part of the process where our office often gets involved. If Arthur is handling a French nationality case, he would be handling the French part, but we often assist clients in getting their civil documents on the US side and making sure that those are the correct documents that are compliant with French law. Thank you very much, Arthur. Let's move on to our next topic. And it looks like our next topic are the trade and tariff considerations. So a few new developments in the past week in the US on tariffs. Roar, what do you have to tell us about how trade and tariff considerations might impact our US citizen who wants to move their wine business to France?
Hello, everyone. So I'm going to talk about the latest developments in trade between the US and the European Union, because France is in the European Union and submitted to the regulations of the organization. So I'll start with some background that I will try to keep short, but I think that this context is necessary to understand some aspects of this webinar, as Becky mentioned. So in July last year, the US and the EU signed a framework trade agreement. The goal of this agreement was to reduce tariffs and establish a new framework for commercial and industrial cooperation. The agreement included first, tariffs capped at 15% on the majority of European exports to the US. Secondly, the elimination of certain tariffs on US exports to the EU. For France, wine and spirits did not receive an exemption and were therefore subject to the high new tariff. And France was not pleased at all, I must say. There's been a lot of articles about that in the press. So on January 20th this year, the European Parliament suspended the ratification process of this agreement. This is not a formal withdrawal, but the agreement cannot yet take full effect. In practice, what does it mean? It means that this suspension blocks the full implementation of the agreement and leaves businesses in a state of uncertainty regarding tariffs. So now, as you may know, the US Supreme Court also blocked President Trump. A few days ago, on February the 20th, the US Supreme Court ruled that the tariffs imposed by President Trump under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, known as the IEEPA, were unconstitutional. This act is a 1977 law that allows the US president to take certain economic measures in case of a national emergency. And the court emphasized that this law does not give the president the power to impose broad tariffs because that authority belongs to Congress. What is important for you to remember is that this court decision eliminated the 15-25% tariffs, including those affecting French wine. And as you can imagine, this time, this decision was welcomed by the wine and spirit sector. But, because there's always a but, in response, President Trump invoked Section 122 of the Trade Act of 1974, which allows temporary tariffs in the case of a serious balance of payments deficit. And these tariffs were set at 10 and then 15% for a maximum of 150 days without getting congressional approval. So this new rate, 15%, should now apply to these products, including wine and spirits, until July the 20th this year. It could end here, However, again, the thing is that the current US economic situation, which President Trump uses to impose these tariff rates, does not really meet the conditions set by the law. This means that these new tariffs are on fragile legal ground and that additional court challenges are still possible. And on the other side, the administration may also prepare other legal justifications, for example, on national security or unfair trade practices to extend tariffs beyond July the 20th. So we may have further news by that date once that 15% rate comes to an end. Very quickly, what are the impacts for businesses and trade? For French importers, for instance, especially in the wine sector, it means that costs are high, contracts need to be renegotiated and prices adjusted, and supply chains and distribution networks must be reevaluated. You may know that better than me, but American consumers are likely to continue facing higher prices, and as a result, larger, better connected companies may have a relative advantage compared to smaller ones. And as you may know as well, the initial tariff increases of last year have already had a really measurable impact. We know that European exports to the US fell by about 5% in volume over the past 12 months. And what does this matter? In conclusion, for a US importer, like in our case, considering moving operations to France means that this importer should take into account several things. First, profit margins and long-term planning are directly affected. Secondly, the location of key operations may need to change to reduce exposure to tariffs. And finally, close coordination between immigration statuses, like Arthur mentioned, legal structure, and trade and taxation strategy that Nadia will talk about after me, is all necessary to navigate the current uncertainty.
Thank you, Aurora. Tariffs are definitely a hot topic this week. So we really appreciate your insight on that issue. I think it's really interesting what you mentioned that, these tariffs do impact small and medium-sized businesses differently from large businesses. One thing that I heard at a year ago was that really large food service businesses were stockpiling alcohol before the tariffs took effect, and they had the resources and the space to do so, whereas smaller businesses don't. So that, they really get hit a lot harder. Like our wine importer in our hypothetical would be really impacted by these tariffs. So thank you very much. Let's move on to Nadia and talk about the tax impacts of relocating to France for our wine importer.
Thank you, Becky. Hello, everyone. So I work in an international mobility field. So my main area of practice is to help people relocate to France. So I have a lot of questions regarding taxation in France in this context. So relocating to France has important tax implication, even though you're still taxable in the US. So I think we need to distinguish the US taxation and the French taxation for this case in particular, because the US tax people based on your nationality, which is not the case in France, which is a more complicated thing. So even though you are taxable in the US as a US tax resident, you may trigger taxes in France, even though you are not relocating, but only doing trades, commercial business activities. So in France, we have some criteria to analyze if you are a French tax resident. So the criteria are on on the diagram, but it is 4 main criteria that are applied sequentially. So you need to go from the top, and if the first criteria is not satisfied, you need to consider the next. So if you live in France with your family, meaning that you have a home, a house, and that you are not working but living in France, this is the main criteria. You should be considered as a tax resident in France. So if you're not living in France and you're living in the US and your family stayed in the US, this criteria is not satisfied. So we need to check the second criteria, which is the main place of stay. So this is where you, in the country where you spend most of your time. So if it's France, you should be considered as a tax resident according to this criteria. So this applies a lot to people traveling a lot and who does not have a family, for example, or are working from many countries. So if you travel a lot, you're moving a lot, and you spend most of your time in the year, the calendar year, in France, you should be considered as a tax resident on this criteria. So if this criteria is not satisfied because you spend equal time in each countries and you spend like half of the year in France and half of the year in the US, this criteria is not satisfied. So we need to check the third criteria, which is the main professional activity. So this is the place where you spend most of your days, of your time for your professional activity. So if you live in Spain, for example, and you work in France, you can be considered as a tax resident in France because you work mainly in France. So yes, this is to keep in mind. And finally, if this criteria is not satisfied, we need to check the final criteria, which is the main, the center of your economic interest. So to sum up really briefly, this is the place where you have your main source of income. So this means that if you have clients, an employer which is in France, or you have rental income in France, you can be considered as a tax resident because your main source of income is in France, even though you are not in France. So for our case, we presume and we assume that the wine importer will be living in France with his family. So he should be considered as a French tax resident. So in France, you're considered as a tax resident from your first day in France. So even though your family came afterwards, or you actually have rented a house after, you are considered as a tax resident from the first day in France. So that being said, even if you are considered as a tax resident in the US, we have the double tax treaties between France and the US that can settle this kind of double residency. So the first criteria is the permanent home. So based on everything we said, if you live in France, your permanent home is in France. So based on the conventional treaty, you're still considered as a tax resident in France. So even though you are not a French tax resident, you are taxed. You can be taxed because you have a business activity in France. So even though you have US clients, you can be considered, you can be taxable on your US income because you work from France and you are performing an activity from France. So based on the third criteria. So the administration, the tax administration in France actually have many indicators. They actually search if you have a long-term lease or if you purchase a property in France. They also check if you enroll your children in the French school system or in a school in France. If you open a bank account, for example. So if you are taxable on your activity, your business activity, your company, even though your company is in the US, but you are just performing from France, this requires some formalities in France. The first one is the business registration. So you need to register in France. So you have a number, which is a serial number, and you are actually immatriculated in France. So this creates a social security contribution liability and also a tax liability. So you can be subject to the VAT in the EU. You should also report your income, everything you earn from your activity in France, especially being paid by US clients. So you have many formalities to keep in mind when performing your business from France. So yeah, the main thing to consider and to actually remember is that the French tax residency depends on where you live, where you work, and that triggers tax liability. And this can also be taxed in the US, but you need, yes, to keep in mind that moving to France triggers immediate tax obligation. So from the first day, you need to anticipate everything from taxation.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Arthur. Thank you, Aurora, and thank you, Nadia. We really appreciate you sharing your expertise with us. There was a question about whether the presentation will be shared. The answer is yes. We will be sharing the presentation on our blog, as well as emailing it to the participants in this webinar. So please stay tuned for that. I also probably should have said at the start, but this is not legal advice. This is for informational purposes. And if you do want specific legal advice, so first of all, there were several questions. As I said, we will not be answering those questions live, but we will get you responses in the form either of a blog or a direct response that will be circulating to the participants in this webinar. And if you do have questions and you would like to specifically consult about French immigration law, civil and business law, or tax law, all three of these attorneys are located on our website along with their contact information, so you can feel free to reach out to them directly. If you do want a comprehensive solution, then you can reach out to me directly. We work with people who have needs in all of these areas and sort of want us to oversee the process. But if you have any specific areas relating to these individuals' areas of expertise, feel free to reach out to them directly. So thank you again for attending our webinar today. We hope you found it helpful, and we will be in touch with a follow-up and recording of the webinar. Have a beautiful day. Bye-bye.